Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to bring to the committee amidst the chaos and the shock and the horror that so many Canadians experienced over the course of the week with regards to the terror attack last Saturday in Israel. A memo from the CBC was quietly circulated, not so quiet because it became public. And it was telling journalists to avoid the word terrorist when referring to Hamas fighters in their publication. So for those on the committee, and I think most Canadians know this by now, but Hamas has been a recognized terrorist organization in this country for over 20 years. And the memo that was leaked reads as follows: do not refer to militants, soldiers, or anyone else as terrorists. And do not was emphasized in bold letters. And there's more in that memo. The notion of terrorism remains heavily politicized and is part of the story, even when quoting or clipping a government or a source referring to fighters as, quote, terrorists. We should add context to ensure the audience understands that this is opinion and not fact. And that includes statements from the Canadian government and Canadian politicians. So the question really is, Mr. Chair, if the Canadian government recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization, and rightfully should, and if you've read what the Canadian government says about that organization, you would quite understand why they were so definitively listed as a terrorist organization. And if you further looked at the Hamas Covenant or the revised charter from 1988, it is clear Hamas has been clear on their genocidal intentions. So the memo was circulated by a gentleman named George Atchie, and he's the director of journalistic standards at the CBC, which of course gets a fair share of Canadian tax dollars. And we would simply like to know why that direction of opinion was put forward by the CBC. They are, after all, a news organization that Canadians pay for, so we would expect that they would get news.
Sometimes the CBC's bias is subtle, right? It's buried in story selection, the kind of things they choose to cover, like climate change and pride issues. It's in careful wording or in what they don't cover, right? Like vaccine injuries. But other times, they just put it in writing, in a memo. And thanks to Blacklock's reporter, we've now seen exactly that. You see, Blacklock's got a hold of a 2023 letter from George Atchie, the CBC's Director of Journalism Standards, explaining why the state broadcaster won't call actual terrorists terrorists. The reason? The word is too, quote, highly politicized and reflects a, quote, certain narrative. What narrative is that? I think truth. Now, the letter was written 7 months before October 7th, 2023, when Hamas, a group the Canadian government has officially listed as a terrorist organization since 2002, slaughtered 1,400 people in Israel, including 8 Canadians. Women and girls were raped and murdered. Entire families were massacred. Babies were brutally killed. If that's not terrorism, nothing is. And yet 4 days after the massacre, Atchie sent a directive to every newsroom. Don't call them terrorists. Don't call them militants. Don't call them soldiers. Don't use the word at all. And let's remember, Hamas recorded their atrocities and then published them so that the world could see. For years before this, CBC routinely identified Hamas as a terrorist group because it is an outlawed terrorist organization. But now, suddenly saying terrorist is too loaded, too political. One label the CBC just won't touch. And Canadians have noticed In 2023, according to Blacklock's reporting, CBC racked up nearly 4,800 viewer complaints, a 45% jump from the year before. Most of those complaints were about CBC's anti-Semitic, both sides coverage of Hamas atrocities. Conservative MP Rachel Thomas put it bluntly in committee. Listen to this.
The CBC is failing. They are failing the Jewish community. They are failing the innocent whose lives have been lost. They are failing Canadians. There's a leaked memo from the Director of Journalistic Standards who instructed journalists to refrain from using the term terrorist in his reference or in their reference to Hamas fighters. Now, Hamas, as mentioned, has been listed on Canada's official list of terrorists for more than 20 years. And so this isn't a point for debate. This isn't a matter of opinion, but rather this is fact. And so to justify its decision, however, the CBC came out and said, well, we just don't want our journalists to take sides. And if they use the term terrorist, they will be taking a side. But to that, I would say, no doubt. Of course you're taking a side. You're taking a side against terrorists. What other side would you want to take? When you have 1,400 people who were massacred in an evening, when you have women and girls who are raped and then murdered and then paraded through the city, when you have 40 babies who are beheaded, whose side are you on? As if there would be some other side to take. Of course you should be against Hamas, which is a terrorist organization functioning in a sadistic manner. It is pure evil, and to suggest otherwise is alarming.
But here's where it really gets rich, hypocritical. CBC only gets squeamish about taking sides when it's actual terrorists. When it comes to peaceful Canadians they don't like but would love to label as terrorists, oh, they'll take sides all day long. They'll even invent a narrative if they need to. Let's rewind to January 2022. I think you guys know exactly where I'm going with this. Neil Coxall, anchor of Power and Politics, is interviewing Liberal Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino as the anti-mandate Freedom Convoy is rolling into Ottawa. And completely unprompted, she just floats this fever dream into the ether. Listen to this.
I do ask that because, given Canada's support of Ukraine in this current crisis with Russia, I don't know if it's far-fetched to ask, but there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, but perhaps even instigating it from the outset.
Well, again, I'm going to defer to our partners in the public safety, the trained officials and experts in that area.
Concerns? Concerns from whom? She doesn't say. No evidence, no sources. And here's the truth. CSIS had already denied any Russian involvement in the convoy. Did Mendicino correct her? Of course not. He just deferred to his national security experts, the same experts that had already debunked that fevered dream from Coxall. So here's your CBC double standard in black and white. With Hamas, they hide behind nuance and balance and claim moral clarity on issues of terrorist atrocities. Well, that's just too political. But with peaceful Canadian truckers, with blue-collar uprisings, they run wild with conspiracy theories about dangerous foreign plots. Even the RCMP called the convoy peaceful. Organizers told their supporters to report any troublemakers to police.
And at no time did any of those 4 individuals not cooperate with the OPS.
Not to my knowledge.
And the same was true with the Ontario Provincial Police.
In your view, was the Emergencies Act necessary to end the protest in Ottawa?
Well, that's a loaded question. I'm a police officer. Parliament gives us legislation. We don't make legislation. They provide it to us and we use it to the best of our abilities. They gave us a piece of legislation to use. We were thankful for it and we used it to the best of our abilities to incorporate in our plan.
And in your view, was there a police solution to the demonstrations?
A police solution? Yes.
Policing solution?
There was a solution, and we reached that solution. We had some help with the EMCPA, the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act regulations that we have at the province, and the Emergencies Act. But in my humble opinion, we would have reached the same solution with the plan that we had without either of those pieces of legislation.
Within around the same timeline?
Yes.
But the CBC and the rest of the legacy media still painted the convoy as Canada's January 6th, complete with shadowy Russian agents, except there were no threats to national security at all.
I think the superintendent's evidence was that there were no threats that materialized, and it said there were no credible threats to national security. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And that's a very important part and piece, is that when you move from strategic intelligence into operational and tactical intelligence and establishing thresholds for mandates and thresholds for charges, that further analysis needs to be done to determine whether it's credible and whether that threat actually came to fruition.
And this is why Canadians don't trust the CBC. They don't just report the news. They decide the side they're on first, and then they build the journalism to match it. They don't do what we do at Rebel News, and that is follow the facts wherever they lead us. And let me be clear here. I'm not against bias in journalism. I think it should come as no surprise to you that I am conservative and I see things through a conservative worldview and I report through a conservative worldview. But what I am about my viewpoint is honest. And I don't insult you by thinking that you can't see it too. And I don't expect you to pay for it unless you want to. And as the CBC, you're forced to hand them $1.5 billion a year for their insults and their narrative building and their half-truths.